Shabbat shalom. So I was going to welcome Rabbi Booth back to town, back to Shul, and maybe invite him to come sit. Anyway, I think we all feel honored, actually, that Rabbi Booth is choosing on a Shabbat where he's on sabbatical to come to Shul with his family. So I know that you're in some pain, and we understand if you need to walk around.
By the way, it's not me. My kids wanted to come, so then I could say no.
So again, welcome to all those on Zoom, and we have a few newcomers in the congregation today, and it's just really strengthening, I think, to see one another and to be together. I taught the women's study group on Thursday, this time all on Zoom, which we hadn't done since, I don't know, for several months. And I decided at the beginning just to let people kind of catch up and, call on each box, each person to just do a brief check-in. And maybe not surprisingly, every single check-in was basically a COVID check-in. Just expressing fear and stress and isolation and frustration with feeling like we've retreated and being back in a place that we don't want to be. People reporting on if they have tests and if they know someone with COVID and all of the things that we talk about constantly. I felt like it was a great relief to sort of move out of that and turn to Torah. And in fact, I think this parsha actually has a profound message for us in this time that we're living in. The Israelites too, as we just read, in the thick of plague and fear and taking precautions on the night of the 10th plague with the angel of death, going through Egypt. Moses has just instructed them to take a lamb for each household and put the blood on their doorposts to protect them from the angel of death. And the next verse takes a radical turn. In Exodus 12, verse 24, Moses talks about the future. You shall observe this as an institution for all time, for you and for your descendants. And when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, as God has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, Ma ha'avodah hazot lachem? What is this ritual to you? What does this mean to you? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, because God passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but saved our houses. We actually have multiple times in this parsha where the Torah kind of zooms out of the fear and the activity of the moment to a future time with a similar instruction. For example, in chapter 13, verse 14, and when in a time to come your son asks you, saying, Mazot, what is this? What does this mean? You shall say to him, it was with a mighty hand that the Lord brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. The Torah is doing something transformative here. It's telling the people, you're going to live through this. there's going to be a future that looks different from this moment that you're in. When these events are in the past. And B, the Torah is asking a question. How are you going to remember it? What do you want your children or future generations to know? What are the stories that you are going to tell? I think it is worth asking this question about COVID. To imagine ourselves at some future point, whenever that is, looking back and asking the question, what was this all about? What do we want to learn from the experience? What stories do we want to tell? And I imagine there are multiple. You know, this was a plague that killed millions of people, that affected every corner of the world. A time of darkness and isolation. But what other stories might we want to tell alongside it? Maybe just think for a moment of what stories you would like to look back and tell. I'd like to look back and say, this was a time when we saw that people could adapt more than we imagined we were capable of, and that institutions could adapt. That people could go to school and shul and work in masks. They could eat lunch outside. People could learn to Zoom and reconnect in ways never thought possible. Be together for life cycle events, joyous and sad, Shiva minions, funerals, with people across the world, putting together the pieces of a life in a way that was never possible before. I have learned that people are capable of a great deal of isolation, that we can isolate more than I thought possible, and that people need people. I think when I imagine myself in some future time looking back, or maybe I imagine my children telling the stories of this experience, I think of a small experience, but a noteworthy one to me, of the first summer of COVID, after several months of online school and sheltering in place, and summer camps being canceled, not being able to go to overnight camps, or being a virtual offering as, you know, a poor substitution. My kids deciding to have an in-person theater camp in our backyard, and going and recruiting friends, trying to convince friends and their parents that this would be an okay thing to do during COVID. They would wear masks, they would sing and dance and act outside, everyone would bring their own lunch, but they were going to do it. And it proved to be transformative. There were, you know, participants who had been going through incredibly tough times, not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to, just not wanting to do anything. And suddenly there was a project, and everyone got behind it, and we're excited to do Into the Woods Junior. That's one of the stories that I would like to tell from this time. Stories make us who we are. They shape our identity. And we have a choice of what stories we dwell on. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks talks extensively in this parsha about the power of story in shaping identity. He says, identity needs memory, and memory is encoded in the stories we tell. Without narrative, there is no memory, and without memory, we have no identity. The most powerful link between the generations is the tale of those who came before us, a tale that becomes ours and that we hand on as a sacred heritage to those who will come after us. We are the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And identity begins in the story parents tell their children. That narrative provides the answer to three fundamental questions every reflective individual must ask at some stage in their lives. Who am I? Why am I here? How then shall I live? There are many answers to these questions, says Sacks, but the Jewish ones are, I am a member of the people whom God rescued from slavery to freedom. I am here to build a society that honors the freedom of others, not just my own. And I must live in conscious knowledge that freedom is the gift of God, honored by keeping God's covenant of law and love. I was thinking today, knowing I was going to read that, I'm just thinking about all the people in the room actually who have chosen to become a part of the Jewish people. And that it's sort of an amazing thing that you can enter into a story, that you can adopt a story and put yourself into the we of the story, and it becomes a part of our shared identity. And how powerful it is to have a shared story, especially in this time where we're well aware of how divisive it can be, all of our competing narratives. We need to have a shared story, and we need to tell our own personal stories too. I want to close with a story that I read while I was in Florida from this new book by Bruce Feiler, Life is in the Transitions. Bruce Feiler actually was a speaker at a Kolamet spring brunch some years back. He's the author of Walking the Bible. And I was just really taken with the story that he begins his book with. So he opens with this gripping story about his father, who at age 80 became suicidal. He describes his father as an uncommonly friendly human being, a Jew from Savannah, Georgia, a Navy veteran, a civic leader, a Southern Democrat. He was never depressed a minute in his life until he got Parkinson's, which can affect one's mobility and one's mood. Bruce's grandfather had suffered from Parkinson's late in his life, and he actually did commit suicide. Bruce's father had vowed not to do the same, but when he got sick, he changed his mind. 6 times in the next 12 weeks, Bruce's father attempted to end his life. Their family tried every treatment they could think of: counseling, medical treatments, electroconvulsive therapy. Nothing helped. Then Bruce had an idea. He emailed his father a question. What were your favorite toys as a child? His dad took the question seriously. He reflected for several days, and he wrote Bruce an answer. Encouraged by his dad's positive response, Bruce wrote his father another question. Are you still friends with any of your friends from high school? Then another question. What was your house like as a child? Soon Bruce was emailing his father a question every Monday morning. How did you become an Eagle Scout? How did you join the Navy? How did you meet Mom? In his words, my father couldn't move his fingers at this point, so he couldn't type. He would think about the questions all week, dictate his story to Siri, then print out a draft and edit it. He began adding photographs, newspaper clippings, love letters to my mom. As his writing grew bolder, I made the questions more probing. What is your biggest regret? How did you survive your first downturn? The process continued for the next 4 years. Wow. Until my father, a man who had never written anything longer than a memo, backed into writing an autobiography. It was the most remarkable transformation any of us in the family had ever seen. This experience spurred Bruce to then spend several years researching storytelling from a neuroscience perspective, a psychological perspective, and his own perspective, soliciting several hundred life stories from people. Ultimately, I think his message harkens right back to the Torah portion we read this morning. Our lives are shaped by the stories we tell. As Jews, we're given an incredible gift of being part of a story. To say, we were slaves in Egypt and God took us out with an outstretched arm. And we have a responsibility to live in relationship with God and to continue the story. We also have the ability to lift ourselves out of the struggles of our moment and to ask ourselves, what stories do we want to tell from this? What are the lessons? What meaning do we wish to draw? Finally, I think there's one other important common thread between Bruce's story with his father and our Parsha. And that is the value of someone asking a question. Whether it's a child asking a parent, or a parent asking a child, or a friend asking a friend, or a stranger asking a stranger, a simple question can transform us. It can open the door to a treasury of meaning. So let us ask ourselves, Mazot, what is this? This COVID thing, this Judaism, this life? What is the meaning of it? What are the lessons that you want to hold on to? And equally important, let us reach out and ask someone else the question. And let us listen to their story. Shabbat shalom.